Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the workshop on student resistance to active learning and how to reduce it. I think most of you are familiar with Mike, so I'll just leave the floor for Mike.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. This is the final one in a series of workshops that we've given on active learning and inductive learning and instructional design. And so one of the questions and concerns that faculty often have about adopting new teaching techniques or more active teaching techniques is how are students going to respond? Do they respond very negatively? And concerns about that is actually one of the barriers for getting faculty to adopt these methods. So tonight I want to talk about the research about that we have on, how do students respond to active learning? Is it positive or negative? And if it is negative, what, if anything, can faculty do about that? So that's what I want to do for the next couple of hours. The objectives that I have is a little bit of a review on active learning for anyone who wasn't here at the last workshop. So at the end of our evening together, I again want people to be able to tell me what active learning is and what some of the benefits are. I want you to be able to identify the ways that research says that students respond to active learning when we try it in our classrooms. That as faculty have a lot of feelings about that, but there hasn't been a lot of good research up to now. And so I want to share with you some of the research that we have on how students respond and to get you to be able to encapsulate that research. I think most practical question that we have is, whatever the level of student resistance to active learning, what can we do about that? So at the end of our time together, I would like everyone to be able to articulate some strategies that research has shown are effective for reducing student resistance and improving their response to active learning. And I will try not to talk all the time. So I'll try to give you some time to develop some plans to both refine your active learning techniques and to implement some strategies for reducing student resistance. All right, so these are my goals for you for the next 2 hours. As a very brief reminder, let's see if I can get people to tell me what active learning is. So last week I did a workshop on active learning in online environments. If you would, in the chat window, give me your definition of active learning. When I ask how do students respond to active learning, what does that mean? What are they responding to? In the chat window, give me how you define active learning. Okay, I guess students are engaged. Students are in charge. Always nice kind of a who's in control and who's leading thing definition. Active engagement. So the definition that we gave last week was a very broad one. That is, we define active learning is anytime the instructor asks every student in class to do something that engages them with the material, as long as that activity is not to listen to me lecture and take notes. So he said there were two elements of active learning. That is, in active learning, the instructor has to ask every student in the class to do some activity, and that activity cannot be listen to me lecture and take notes. And whatever that activity is, has to get students to think about or engage with the content that the instructor wants them to learn. That's our definition of active learning. We also last week went over kind of the broad spectrum of what that really entails as an instructor. So what we did last week was we said, look, that's a very broad definition, and it encompasses a whole variety of techniques, some pretty radical, some not so radical. The technique that I'm using this evening, for example, is simple active learning. And in simple active learning, the instructor still lectures most of the time, but every so often the instructor will stop lecturing and do a brief activity. Like ask you in the chat window to tell me what active learning is. On the other end of the spectrum, there are some more radical techniques like problem-based learning or discovery learning or flipped classrooms. And in those types of active learning, the instructor lectures very little or not at all. Many of the faculty at your university are using a variety of inductive methods, and some of you are using problem-based learning and project-based learning. And those are fairly radical teaching techniques where you tend to lecture a bit less. Okay, so that's what I mean about active learning. That's the kind of spectrum. In my workshop so far, while I have shared with you some research articles, I haven't spent a lot of time going over the research on active learning. But to reiterate, the reason why people like me and others try to encourage faculty to adopt active learning techniques is we have a lot of research that shows that active learning has a number of benefits. That is, research shows that active learning results in students learning more, feeling more motivated, and as a result of that motivation, being retained in the academic programs to greater degrees. That is, fewer students fail the exams and fail the courses because they learn more and do better on tests when the instructor uses active learning. And because the students are more motivated and engaged, they tend to drop out of academic programs at lower rates. So active learning has a number of documented benefits of the sort that all of us care about. Students last longer and they learn more. Again, I haven't really hit the research for active learning very strongly in these workshops, but this is a quote from the latest meta-analysis of active learning in STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. And what the quote says is, pretend that instead of looking at the research on active learning versus traditional classes, we were doing a medical test and we were testing a drug. Right? And the drug was like active learning and the placebo was like a traditional lecture. In that environment, what you would find is current ethical guidelines would compel us to stop the study and give the drug to everybody because we know enough about the effectiveness of the drug that it would just be unethical to continue that study. Like when you know the medicine works, it's not ethical anymore to continue to give people the placebo. You need to give everybody the drug because you know it works. That's the situation that we have with active learning in traditional lectures. We know enough about the efficacy of active learning that on some levels, it is simply unethical to continue to straight lecture in our classrooms. The research on the effectiveness of active learning is just that compelling, okay? All of that we talked about last time, but let me ask you kind of the question, which drives a lot of my current research, all right? That is summarizing what we've said about active learning. We said, look, active learning is a broad spectrum of techniques. There's a flavor of active learning for everyone. If you want to be radical, you can be radical. If you don't want to be very radical, you don't have to be radical. So there is a sort of active learning that would suit every faculty's personality and style. It works. We have lots of research that shows that active learning results in more learning, more motivated students, and better retention. Active learning is easy to do, or it can be. That is, some types of active learning are not easy to do, but many types are. The type I'm doing with you this evening, in fact, is quite easy. So the question I want you to answer in the chat window is, given all this, given that there is a sort of active learning that fits everybody's personality and style, given the overwhelming research that shows that it works for every outcome that we care about, and given that it can be very easy to do, in the chat window, tell me, why is the lecture still so pervasive? The best data that we have in the US, I don't have data in Saudi Arabia, but my guess is it would be the same. The best data we have is that the traditional lecture is still by far the most common educational approach. Given all the things that are on this slide, you tell me in the chat window, why is that? Why are people still doing so much lecturing and so little active learning? Okay, some people think it's difficult to change, and it is. Someone wrote that it still works well. We have to define well, but again, proponents of active learning like myself don't think that lectures don't work. What we think is active learning works better. We have some things on effort. There's no effort in preparing, it's easier. People that are just used to lecture, meaning change is hard. And it requires less effort to just keep doing what we're doing. Good. Some things on comfort zone. Great. This question, of course, is one of my research questions. I think I had mentioned that I've become very interested in, how do you get more faculty to actually do the thing that research tells us they should be doing, right? That question, frankly, is a very practical question. And so we have some research on that. when you ask faculty about what the barriers are, what is it that's stopping you from using active learning? What comes up is several things. The most common ones are either one, the faculty either are unaware of the research on the effectiveness of active learning, or they're not convinced by it. And sometimes that drives educational researchers crazy. But I don't think that's surprising. That is, I don't keep up with all of your research areas. Why should I expect you to keep up with mine? That is, you're all busy doing your own research. Most engineering or STEM or business faculty don't spend a lot of time reading the educational research, so they simply may be unaware of the research on effectiveness. But we don't need more research. That research exists. Faculty are also concerned about class time and their ability to cover the syllabus. That's a very common concern. But as I showed you last week, there are plenty of ways of using active learning that don't take much of your class time and allow you to still cover all the things that you want to cover. So that's a concern. But again, we don't need more research on that. Some faculty are concerned about preparation time, and I saw that in some of your chat comments. And again, that's a real concern because some types of active learning, like problem-based learning or cooperative learning or flipped classrooms, really do take a lot of preparation time. But there are some types of active learning, minute papers or polls that take very little preparation time. So again, we don't need more research on that. We can already point out techniques that don't require much preparation time. But one of the common concerns that is consistently identified by instructors about active learning and why they don't do very much of it is their fears of student resistance. Faculty have expressed consistently a very strong concern that if they try to do something in the classroom that put more responsibility on the student or asked the students to do something that was new that they're not used to, that the students would rebel in any number of ways, right? And so that concern is one of the barriers that we need to address. And frankly, up to now, there has not been a lot of good research on student resistance to active learning, but that's changing. I'm doing some of that research myself, and so are some others. So this evening, I want to talk about some of those, what we know about student resistance. Okay, that's the framing for what I want to do for the rest of the workshop. Okay, let's see if I can get you to brainstorm. How do you think students could respond to active learning, right? So if you walked into the classroom and stopped lecturing for a minute or two and asked your students to do something, either on their own or turning to a neighbor, in the chat window, tell me all the ways you can think of that students might respond. Right? If you walked into a classroom and did some active learning, in the chat room, tell me all the ways that you can imagine students might respond to you using active learning in your class. Let's see what you can come up with. Okay, so many of them may respond positively. Some of them just sit there and wait for the time to pass. Again, use your imagination. How might students respond? If you walked into the classroom and asked them to do something, either on their own or with someone else, what could they do? What might they do? Some students might appreciate it, but not all of them might. Some of them might not. Okay. Some would respond positively, some would resist. Great. Okay, so you're coming up with a variety of things. Some might be hesitant or shy. Some might be surprised. Like, what is this? This is not what I'm used to. Okay, let's walk through. What I think some of the options are. One option is students might simply turn to a neighbor and engage in the activity and do the activity. Right? As some of you mentioned, some of the responses can be positive. When you walk into a classroom and ask your students to turn to a neighbor and engage, one possible response, at least in theory, is that they do just that, okay? But of course, there might be some student resistance. Students might react in some ways that are negative. They might complain to a student nearby about what the instructor is asking them to do, or they might complain to the teacher or to the dean or the department head. They might, look at their phones or engage in some other activity other than the activity that the instructor wants. or they might just sleep or zone out or do nothing, just kind of wait for the time to go by. So lots and lots of things that a student might do if you walk into a classroom and ask them to engage in an activity. And many of those came up in the chat window. Okay, so let's show when in the research that we're doing now, looking at how students respond, we're looking at two things. Some of those responses are attitudinal, because some of what faculty worry about are students' attitudes. That is, what if I try this and my students hate it? What if I try this and they hate me? All right, so part of what we're looking at in our research on student responses is, what are the attitudes that students have when you ask them to do active learning? Okay. But of course, in addition to attitudes, some of the things that faculty are worried about are behaviors. And of course, there's a link, right? There's a connection between how students feel and how they act. You know, if they really hate the activities, if that's their attitudinal response, that might drive them to complain, either to you or to your boss, okay? So we're looking at a couple of things. With respect to attitudes, we're monitoring, do students value the activities? That is, do the students think the activities are worthwhile? Do the students think that the activities generally contribute to their learning or not? We're also looking at positivity, meaning, do the students like the activities? Do they enjoy the activities? Or do they dislike the activities and really and not enjoy them? All right, so those are the attitudinal responses that we've been looking at in our research. We're also looking at behaviors. That is, do the students participate? When I ask you to participate in an activity, do the students generally participate or do they not? We're looking at their distraction, which is the opposite of participating. That is, not only do they not participate, do they distract other people nearby? Okay. And then finally, evaluation. That is, when students are asked to do an activity, how does that influence how they evaluate the teaching in the end of semester course evaluations? Does the use of active learning make them more likely to say good things about the instructor, or does it make them more likely to say bad things about the course and the instructor? Okay, so that is the data that we've been collecting. That is the data that I want to share with you. Okay, let's do a poll. I'd like you to think about, how do you think active learning correlates with the end of semester course evaluations that students give? That is, do you think there's a strong negative correlation between the use of active learning and student evaluations? That is it that the instructors who do the most active learning get the weakest or worst course evaluations or not? Do you think there's a weak negative correlation between the use of active learning and evaluations? Or C, do you think there's no correlation at all? That is, whether or not you use active learning doesn't have any influence on the course evaluation. Is there a weak positive correlation with the use of active learning and course evaluations, or do you think there's a strong positive correlation? That is, students really respond positively when faculty use active learning, right? And which one of these things would you predict? Okay, I got about half of the people who have responded. Let me wait for a little bit longer to kind of see what their response is. Great, I think about 27 out of 37. Perfect. I have most of you. I'm going to end the polling and display the results. Okay, so I'd say the responses are all over the board, but there's a slight edge for people predicting that that there's a positive correlation. So all over the map, but people in general are predicting positive things. Okay, let's do poll number 2, which is, what's the most common student response when they're asked to do an activity? That is, when you walk into a classroom and ask your students to turn to a neighbor and do an activity, what's their most common response? Do you think the most common response is to complain? Do you think their most common response is to talk to a neighbor about something else? Do you think that their most common response is to kind of pretend to do the activity but not really do it? Do you think their response is to do the activity but to just do it minimally, kind of rush through and not really engage? Or do you think the most common response is they participate actively? What do you think the most common response is? Okay, again, I got about half the respondents. Let's see if we can get a little bit more than half of the people that respond. Okay, that's most of you. Let's kind of share the results. So again, the most common response that people think is that students will do the activity, but kind of minimally. And again, the responses are all over the board in terms of what students might do, but most of you are more positive than not. Okay, so let's go through and kind of share kind of what the results say. We have data from dozens and dozens of undergraduate STEM classes in the US with about 1,800 students at this point. Okay. So I would say based on the data that we've been collecting, the student response to active learning is mostly, of course, not entirely, but mostly positive. That is, it's very rare for students to demonstrate what I'll call open resistance. That is complaining to each other, complaining to an instructor, or complaining to a department head. So that sort of student resistance is almost entirely absent. Okay. When students do resist, passive resistance is the more common one. That is, they zone out and they do very little or nothing. So the most common ways that students demonstrate resistance in the undergraduate STEM classes is passively. But active participation, active student engagement is the most common student response. That is, by and large, when instructors walk into a classroom and ask students to turn to a neighbor and engage in an activity, the most common response is students just do the activity and try their best. That is the most common response. Okay. Here's our very preliminary data. All right, so we're still in the middle of this research. Let me kind of walk you through what the mean responses are. So we've collected data. The initial instrument used a 5-point scale. Let me kind of walk you through what the data says. 1, in terms of participation, the student response is about a 4. All right, that is, again, the most common response that students exhibit when asked to engage in an activity is they do the activity and try their best. All right, that is by far the most common response, a fairly positive response. By and large, students value the activities. Again, rounding up, the answer is almost 4 out of 5. That is, students on average see value in the activities and don't think they're a waste of time. Again, on average, students are more positive than not. That is, more students like the activities than dislike the activities. There is some distractive behaviors, but it's uncommon. Students seldom distract people that are nearby them. The evaluation is simply what the average evaluation was for these particular courses. It's not correlated with anything. But the takeaway here is, based on our preliminary data, what you'll see is, I think, encouraging for faculty thinking about using active learning. That is, by and large, students do the activity, try their best, think it's worthwhile, like it, and seldom distract their neighbors. That's kind of the first cut analysis of the data. We're still collecting data. We've changed the instrument a little bit just to give you the latest data, which I think looks even better, right? So again, if you scan these numbers, what you'll see is, on average, students are pretty strongly supporting that they see value in the activity, that they like the activities, that they participate strongly in the activities, and they seldom distract. So again, I would say the data that we have on student resistance, you should find comforting. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is there's actually a fairly strong and positive correlation between the amount of active learning use and student evaluation. So the correlation coefficient is a little bit more than a positive 0.5. That's considered a strong correlation coefficient. So going back to our first poll question, how do students respond to active learning? In general, the answer is they respond quite positively. Okay, and again, that's one of the messages that I want to get across. The data that we've collected with respect to US faculty is, in general, there's a disconnect between faculty perceptions and reality. That is, the correlations between what faculty think how students will respond and how students really respond, the correlation coefficients are quite small and they're not statistically significant. That is, in general, faculty are not particularly good judges of how students are going to respond to active learning. And they're much more negative. That is, faculty think that students are going to be, on average, much more negative than the data suggests they really are. And that's an important finding because faculty concerns about student resistance are based on faculty perception. That is, your concern about using active learning is based on your fear, your thoughts of how students are going to respond. And in general, most faculty are more negative about how they think students are going to respond than in fact students really do respond. Okay. All right. I've been doing a lot of talking. Let me see if I can put you into breakout rooms and think about what do you think, what do you think is going to influence how students respond? That is, the rest of the workshop is going to be on things that you might do that influence student responses, which means you need to think about what are the things that determine how students respond to active learning. So I'm going to ask Solomon to put you into breakout rooms. In your breakout rooms, what I would like you to do is see if you can identify all the things that you think would matter that would influence how a student responds to active learning, and whether the student is active learning or not. Okay. Is there anyone who doesn't know what I want you to do in the breakout room?
Okay, I will open the breakout rooms.
Okay, take a couple of minutes and see if you can brainstorm all the things you can think of that would influence how students respond and what might make them more resistant to active learning. All the things you can think of that might matter. Go. Simon, can you end the breakout rooms?
Okay.
Thank you. And are you seeing my slides again?
Yes, I can see Joshua lights.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I popped around to the various breakout rooms, so I heard that you were having different conversations about things that influence student resistance. Let me take you back to kind of what we've done research-wise and start sharing some of that with you. So what we've looked at in our research on student resistance is we've tried to see how 3 different categories of things influence how students respond. All right, so the resistance behaviors are the ones that we've mentioned in the previous slides. We've been looking at some characteristics of the student or the instructor or the course to see if that makes any difference. We've been looking at the type of active learning to see if that makes any difference. And we've been looking at 2 particular strategies that are observable that have been recommended in the literature for reducing resistance to see if they make any difference. Okay, so those are the things we've been looking at. What we have found, I'd say so far at least, somewhat surprisingly to me, is we haven't seen a whole lot of very significant predictors that have to do with the student or the instructor or the course characteristic. That is, as we drill down a little bit more using more sophisticated statistics, we may start to see something, but whatever we see is not particularly big, all right? So things like the gender of the student, the gender of the instructor, the student's expected grade, or the class size. So far in our analysis, none of those things have had any significant predictive ability in terms of how students respond. Okay. In terms of active learning, we've sliced and diced this a couple of ways, but so far we're not seeing any big impact of the type of active learning. And again, I found that somewhat surprising, and maybe our more sophisticated analysis will start to show something as we continue to look at that. But so far, we're not seeing any significant effect of the type of active learning in terms of student resistance levels, okay? The place that we're seeing by far the biggest impact are what faculty do. That is the biggest determinant of how students respond to active learning based on our research are not characteristic of the students, are not the type of active learning, but are the strategies that instructors use to introduce and facilitate the active learning in their class. So the 2 that we've been looking at are explanation strategies. How much and how do faculty explain what they're doing and why, and how clearly do they explain the activities? That has a very significant impact on the student response. And facilitation strategies, things that faculty do to keep things going. I see that there's a question somewhere in the chat window. Let's see. Yeah, I was just looking at the comment. Yeah, so the characteristics of the instructor are the things that make a difference. And again, what I would say is, I think you should find that comforting, right? That is, I don't have a whole lot of control over most of the student and class characteristics. You know, I don't determine my own gender. I don't determine the gender of my students. I don't determine my own class size. I teach the class sizes that are assigned. All right. So the fact that those are not significant predictors is fine because I don't control those things anyway. The comforting part for me as the instructor is the things I do control, which is how I introduce and facilitate the active learning. Those are the things that have the biggest difference. So the takeaway is, 1, in general, the level of students' resistance tends to be fairly low anyway. And 2, the things that tend to influence are things that you as the instructor have a lot of control over. Okay, so again, the point of the rest of the workshop is, you know, what are those things and how do I do those things? Okay, again, this is our preliminary data. It's kind of a busy slide. What I want you to see on this slide is that the kind of yellow bars are showing the impact of explanation on students' participation and evaluation and distraction. And the blue bars are showing the effect of facilitation on that. So again, let's just kind of walk you through the sorts of things that we're seeing in our data. For example, faculty's use and students' perceptions of faculty's use of explanation strategies correlate positively with their participation, correlate positively with the evaluation of the teaching in the class, and correlate negatively with distraction behaviors. That is, the more faculty explain things, the more students participate, the less the students distract each other, and the higher the course evaluations are at the end, okay? This blue bar is an example of facilitation strategies. Again, the more faculty facilitate the activity, the higher the course evaluations are, the higher the student participation is and the less distraction that you see. Okay, again, this is our preliminary analysis. I'd say our more sophisticated multi-level modeling is showing even stronger effects. That is, the more we look at this data, the better it is in terms of the impact of explanation and facilitation strategies. So again, the point I want to get across with the workshop group today is this should be a comforting message. There are things that you can do to make things better, and they're actually, the correlation coefficients can be quite strong. Okay.
Mike, can we ask or wait for the end?
Yeah, please. I've been doing too much talking. Let me stop talking and let you talk and ask questions.
Yeah, I just have not a dilemma, but a question. Okay.
Sure.
At least there is one factor that does affect the performance, which is, as you said, explanation and facilitation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to the slide where it shows high percentages of students acceptance or
Mm-hmm.
and so on, does it mean that in that slide we assume that a good explanation and facilitation was assumed?
No. What we're assuming is, so it's an empirical slide, right? That is based on whatever quality faculty are doing. So we have data from about 40 different undergraduate STEM classrooms in the US. And we've both asked students to report on the faculty's use of strategies. We've had faculty report on their use of strategies, and we've had observers in the room observing the strategies. And all we're doing is looking at correlations between the amount of times explanation strategies are being used and what the student response is. So we're not assuming anything about the quality of the explanation other than that's the quality that faculty are using in these classrooms, right? That is, so the quality is whatever faculty do, right? So we've picked these faculty fairly randomly. So there's no particular reason to think that they're any better than you are at explanation or facilitation. They are what they are.
And I would assume as we vary in our lecturing skills, we should also vary. I mean, we must vary in our active learning skills.
Sure.
Where does that show faculty to faculty variations of the
Yeah, so I'd say we're still looking in that particular piece. The reason why I'm showing you correlations is we're actually in the middle of doing a randomized controls study on this particular question. And then the COVID pandemic interrupted our classroom observations. And so, our control study had to be put on hiatus. And so we don't have as much of a control as we would like, which is why I'm just showing correlations. But I think you're exactly right. That is, just like we have different skills in terms of our ability to lecture, we have different skills in terms of our ability to facilitate active learning, right? I think that's true. I mean, I think the point of tonight is to point out what people do that works so they get more of us to do more of those things that work. Okay, good question. Again, I'm happy to stop and pause. Any other questions that people have? I see one more comment in the chat. Let's see.
Mike, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you using the word reduce in your title might indicate that students' resistance will remain. Do you agree?
Yeah. So I think it's not reasonable to expect that all measures of student resistance would go away entirely. That's like saying that every student would always participate fully all the time and would always like the activity and would always tell you that you're a great teacher. So that's not realistic. I would simply point out that that's not realistic for lecturing either, right? Not everybody loves my lectures. Not everybody thinks my lectures are worthwhile. So I think that's going to be true no matter what teaching style that you pick. Is that the question? Did I answer the right question or did I answer the wrong question?
Yes, this is the record. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But you raise a good point, right? Because I think what is true, as the faculty in the workshop tonight already said, when I asked you how students responded, your responses were more positive than not. That is, most of you thought that a lot of the students would like active learning, but it doesn't take everybody disliking it to really make it to be a barrier. That is, if you're teaching a class with 40 students, if 35 students say, you're a fabulous professor and the class was wonderful, and if 5 students write something really angry and really mad and tell you that you're the worst professor they've ever had, and they've hated everything about your class, those 5 responses are the ones that you're thinking about at night. Those are the ones that you're thinking about, you know, when you're thinking about your course. That is, most of us disproportionately weight strong negative feedback. So student resistance as a barrier doesn't have to depend on most students disliking it. If there's a small number of students that really resist, all right, that in itself can be a barrier, right? So I think that's the reality. I think faculty are concerned about student resistance, even though it's only a small number of students who do it. Some of your students will still resist.
Mike, I would like to comment about the finding that explanation and facilitation, they correlate with the response of the student. I think this makes sense to me because expectation, what is expected from the student, if it is clear, people will participate. If it is not clear, they will be hesitant to participate. Is this summarizes the finding?
Yeah, in part, right? That is, so again, explanation has 2 parts. One is, if you ask students to do the activity and you've never explained why they should, like what's in it for them, you know, then it's not surprising that they don't participate as much because they don't see the point. But the other element of explanation is even more easy to understand. Like if I put you in a breakout room and I never told you what to do, and you know, if you literally don't know what it is I want you to do, then you're not going to do it, right? So part of it is, as you say, just the clarity of the explanation. So students don't, if you haven't explained clearly what it is you want students to do, then the odds of them doing it are much lower. Okay. Let me pause. This is, again, some of my embarrassment, I think, for some of the research that we do is, you know, I don't think active learning, for example, is a radical idea. You know, the question of, if you do something to actively engage students in the learning process, will they learn more, right? You know, I think it's quite reasonable to think that they would learn more. That being said, it's taken a lot of research to convince faculty to do active learning. On the research that we're doing here in terms of explanation and facilitation, many people quite reasonably have hypothesized that those things would have a positive correlation. Up to now, we haven't had the data to back it up. So what I'm sharing with you this evening is, here's the data that we have to back up, you know, some results that I don't think anybody should find surprising, right? What you can't tell without the research is how strong are those effects. So the research is useful for both verifying what you might have thought anyway, and for demonstrating how strong the impact is. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, Mike, Terry Prince.
Yeah, Kobina.
Okay, so the second example, the one on the facilitation.
Yeah.
In terms of specific example, I would think, let's say if you break students into small groups online and then you visit the to check on how they are doing, that constitutes some form of facilitation, or is there better examples of facilitation?
Right. So in the second half of the workshop, or actually quite soon, I'm going to give some examples of both types of strategies and then give you some time to pick the ones that work for you. But you're right. Facilitation just means once the activity is going, what are the things that the instructor does to keep the ball rolling, to keep the students engaged and participating? That's what we mean by facilitation. But certainly bouncing around to different breakout rooms is an example of that.
Okay, that's fine.
Good. Any other questions or comments?
Mike?
Yes.
This is Mahmoud. Okay. I just have a question. Do you have any data look like multidiscipline, look like student you have in your class, which is what the evaluation on them, how this be able to, because I have 3 different disciplines and from 3 different departments.
Yeah.
And sometimes you face some difficulty with the student, even you, for example, explain clearly, you facilitate, you give them a lot of materials and all the stuff, but because of their background, sometimes it's very difficult to compete with some other student.
Yeah.
You know, in this case, is any data look like kind of studies or something on that to show look like how the things go or what you were,
Right.
you
Good
know?
question. I would say not yet. All right. So our preliminary attempts to look at differences in student backgrounds in terms of how they respond so far has not shown any significant predictors. But we've only done the first cut baseline correlations. You know, we're starting to do some multi-level modeling, trying to disaggregate some of the competing factors. And we're not done that work yet. So I'd say I don't have a great answer to that question yet, but the data that we have so far doesn't show as strong an effect of student background as I might have thought. So more coming. Don't really know the answer to that, but so far we're not seeing a lot.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Let me give you a sense again of this figure right here is a little bit confusing. Let me show you what you're looking at. You know, part of what we tried to do is looked at student evaluations as a very important outcome, because I think, at least in the US, where student evaluations often determine your tenure and promotion, it's the thing that faculty care about very, very much. And so we've looked at students' evaluation of the instructor and of the course, and we've broken up all the faculty in quartiles. So the top of this table are the quartile of faculty who are doing the most explanation. This is the second quartile, this is the third quartile, and at the bottom of the table are the bottom 25% of explanation users. That's whatever the usage is, the people in the lowest 25% of usage are at the bottom, okay? Same thing for the columns in terms of the use of facilitation, all right? So what you see here is the faculty who use the least explanations and use the least facilitation factors, their average course evaluation is 2.7 out of 5, which in the US would be a very bad evaluation. That's a pretty low evaluation. And what we see is the faculty who do the least explanation and do the least facilitation have the lowest course evaluations. Conversely, the faculty that do the most explanation and the most facilitation have an average course evaluation of 4.25 out of 5, which is a good course evaluation. Again, this is correlational and not causational because our controlled study has been interrupted, but the correlations are actually quite large. You get a good sense of how big the impact can be. So I think what I want to point out is our data so far suggests that the extensive use of explanation and facilitation is enough to move your course evaluations from something which is quite bad to something that is quite good. You know, the impact here is quite real. Okay, let's see if I can, again, stop doing the talking and get you to think about explanation strategies. So let me clarify one more time what I mean by explanation strategy, and then let me give you a little bit of time to go off and think about how you would explain active learning in a class that you teach, okay? So here are some examples of explanation strategies that we looked for and that seemed to work. One, you should do something to explain why you are using active learning and not just lecturing all the time, all right? That is, if you're gonna do something that the students perceive to be new and different, and something that the students might perceive to put more responsibility on them, and you want them to participate, you need to give them a reason to participate, right? So one of those things you might do is explain to them why you are using active learning in your class. Another type of explanation strategy that you might do is discuss how the activity relates to their learning. So you might say, look, you know, the point of this class is to get you to learn this skill. Like for those of you who are doing the inductive project this semester and using problem-based learning, all right, I might say, look, you know, engineers in the real world have to on their own solve open-ended problems. In this class, I'm going to use a problem-based learning technique because it will give you practice and feedback on the skills that you need to be a successful engineer, right? So you might explain the connection between the activity that you're using and the learning that you think is important. You might explain how the activities and the active learning relates to their course grade. You might say something like, you know, in this course, I'm going to grade you on your homework. and I'm going to grade you on the exams. But you know, during class, when I'm using active learning, I'm going to ask you to think about and try to do the exact same problems that I'm going to give you for homework and I'm going to grade you on, right? So the point of the activities is I'm going to use class time to get you to understand better what I expect in the things that I grade you on. So that if you participate in these activities, you will get better grades on the homework and better grades on the exams. You might, again, explain to them what the grade consequences are for active learning. Or you might share some of the research. I'm happy to send you some that says, in general, when the instructor use active learning, students learn more and their grades are higher. So one of the reasons why I'm using active learning in this class is because I want you to do well and earn high grades. And when I use active learning, the odds of that go up. Okay. When you are doing the activities, the other type of explanation strategy is the one that I think is fairly clear, which is students won't do the activity if they don't know what it is you want them to do. All right, so you need to explain very clearly what it is you want them to do during the activity. Okay. All right, these are some examples of explanation strategies. Does anybody have any questions about these? If not, I want to put you in breakout rooms. And what I want you to discuss in the breakout rooms is, what do you think would work, right? I mean, you teach at your university, I don't. You know the culture, I don't. In the breakout rooms, I want you to discuss how important you think it is to explain why you're using active learning in your class. And I want you to think about how you should explain it. That is, if you were making your pitch to the students and explaining to them why you're using active learning, I want you to share with your colleagues in the breakout room the explanation that you would use in terms of why you're using it, and to see if you can come up with something you would think would be engaging and compelling for your students. That would be a very effective explanation. Does anybody have?
Yes,
go on.
please, before we, yeah.
Hi, Prince, if you allow me a quick question.
Sure, I will allow you multiple questions.
Okay, one thing that I've observed myself is that when I break our students into teams, and sometimes they come back and say, we've forgotten the instruction.
Yeah.
And similar to what you've just done, I realize you gave a bit lengthy instruction. If we don't get it in the teams, sometimes it impedes our understanding of exactly what we got to do.
I agree.
So, yes.
And I would say again, so, you know, I've admitted to you in my workshops that I'm not a perfect teacher either. That is, you know, I struggle with the same things that you struggle with. You know, my attempt to get around that is like in these online courses is the worksheet. That is, I think there's a fair chance that you will forget my directions. But often in these workshops, you know, I give you a worksheet, and again, Solomon can put the link in the window, in the chat window, and that's my attempt to get around that. So in case you forget, there are some directions written down.
Yeah, I'm looking at it online, whether sometimes it's possible to just share I mean, it's difficult to share it for let's say if you've got many rooms, but if it's possible to give them access to the question on a template where they can access, it facilitates the appreciation of the instruction.
Right, I agree. So again, you know, and you may have better ideas than I do. The two approaches that I've used both involve worksheets. So sometimes I share the link in advance and say, if you'd like to print this out and do it with paper and pencil during the activity, do that. During this workshop and during the others, you know, I've put the document on a bit.ly or a tiny URL link that you can access, you know, from Zoom.
Okay.
Like if we're looking at those strategies, you know, the first two appear to be something you say once or from time to time. It's not really activity related. I mean, specific activity related. Maybe the last one is clear, you know, but the other thing is also really, and this may apply to, you know, to an activity that's considerable in size. But for some small activities, if you want to spend time for this, it's really, you have a considerable time.
Right. So again, I'm not disagreeing. In fact, that's what I want you to discuss in the breakout room, which is, you know, you can overdo any good thing. I don't think you should spend 5 minutes explaining why you're using active learning every time you do a 30-second activity, right? That would be silly, right? At the same time, there probably are some things you need to do on day one that are big picture things in terms of why you're using active learning in the course. And You may periodically want to do some explanations for different times when you're introducing different types of active learning, or maybe there's a particular link between this type of activity and something that you know is coming up that students struggle with on the exams. But you're right, that is figuring out that balance and how to do it is exactly what I want you to talk through. Okay, let me put you in the breakout rooms. And again, what I want you to discuss is how much and how do you think you need to explain your use of active learning, and what do you think will work with your students? What type of explanation do you think would be effective at getting students to buy in to your use of active learning in your class?
Okay, I am opening all the breakout rooms.
Salman, could I get you to close the breakout rooms?
Okay, I will close all the breakout.
Thank you. Thanks for all your help. You make my life much easier.
Okay, yeah, they are coming back.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I noticed looking at my clock that it has been an hour, so I'm gonna give you a 5-minute break. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and talk about anything you want to talk about with respect to explanation, and then I'll pick up and do some more. But for now, to get away from your computer, go take a break. I will see you in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everyone is back. Does anybody have any questions or things they wanted to talk about from the last activity on explanation? Anything that people talked about that they thought was either a good comment to share with the group or some questions you had about how to explain the use of active learning in your classes?
Yeah, I may
Sure.
say something. In the group we discussed the importance of introducing this and so on. And we mentioned two other points. One is maybe it's good, regardless of how much you explain it, you also put something in writing, because it helps when they go back to the activity. It helps to see some reference that they can go back to.
Yeah.
And maybe just to make sure that they understood it well, you ask them, or one of them, before they go to the activity, so what are you going to do? So what did you get? Thank you.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, good. Like I said, I think this one is pretty straightforward. I think the thing for people to think about is kind of the day one stuff. On day one, how are you going to explain active learning to your students in a way that will be compelling and interesting? Okay, let's go through facilitation strategies. Again, trying to give people some ideas. Facilitation means explanation is about what you do at the very beginning when you launch the activity. Facilitation is about those strategies that you use to keep the activity going and to try to encourage most of the students to participate in it. Right? That's what I mean by facilitation, kind of greasing the wheels and making the activity go more smoothly and more effectively. Okay. So the sorts of things that count as facilitation strategies and the sort of things that we're recommending are, when you ask students to do an activity, don't sit at the front of the room and check your email, right? That is, one of the things that you can do is to express through your body language and your activities that you want them to engage and you want them to participate. And one of the ways of doing that is to actually participate yourself. So you might walk into the room to assist the students and circulate around. In an online class, you might kind of bop around from breakout room to breakout room. One of the things that I miss in online classes is I can't tell by scanning the room who's struggling and who's not struggling, right? But in a live classroom, you can typically do that. So in a live classroom, what you might do as a facilitator is, if you notice somebody is not participating for some reason, either if they're having a conversation off topic or they just seem lost or confused, you might walk up to and approach that student in a friendly and helpful way. You might do something at the end of your activity to lead a debrief or a report out. And the report out is a way of encouraging students to participate. That is, if they know that at the end of the activity, they might be asked to report out about what they talked about and what they found, then that might encourage more of them to engage in the activity so they have something to say at the end. Okay, so again, what I'd like to do is one more time put you into breakout rooms and to get you in your breakout rooms to identify all the strategies that you can think of that would be good facilitation strategies. What are all the things that you can think of doing as the instructor that would encourage and facilitate students participating fully in the activities that you had? I've given you 3 on this particular slide. That's not exhaustive. So in your breakout rooms, can you come up with other things that you might do that would work for your students to facilitate the activity and get both more involvement and more effective involvement? Does anybody have any questions about what it is I want you to do? Okay. If not, Solomon, can I have you put people into breakout rooms and see if people can come up with a longer list of facilitation strategies? Thank you.
Opening all the breakout rooms. Should I bring them back?
Keep on reminding myself to unmute myself and to share my screen every time I come back.
Yes. So I bring them back.
Yep, bring them back, please. Thank you. Great. Welcome back, everybody. So I'm curious to see what sort of things you came up with. So as I was circulating around among the breakout rooms, I heard some nice ideas. Someone was suggesting that you might, for example, have a competition. Like I could have in the last breakout room said, I'd like to see who can come up with the largest number of facilitation strategies, and had some kind of contest as a way of getting people to engage more. Okay, so again, that's the sort of thing that I'm looking for. Who came up with something that they thought might be a good engagement strategy for the activities? That's what are things that you can think of that you can do as the instructor that would grease the wheels and make the activity go better, have more student engagement and better engagement. What you come up with?
But was it about engagement or was it about facilitation particularly?
Yeah, what kind of facilitation things do you think you could do? What could you do to facilitate the activities to get more students to participate, or to get them to participate more deeply?
A bonus.
Yeah, so a bonus is a perfectly fine idea. That is, link it to some sort of grade outcome. Okay, what else did you come up with?
It's a bonus as individual or as a group team. Look like, for example, work team.
Probably for a team if it's a team activity, right? That if you put them in groups, then chances are then the bonus would go to the whole group.
Yeah, but I have a problem. Mine, I told you, because I forced the group. I forced the people because I already talked to certain groups. Some of them within the group, they are the good students. They are complaining about their group member. They cannot be able to meet because I always give them something. In this case, if a group is some of them weak and they are not coordinating together about this, that will fire back on me if I give point for other group more than the others. This is something could be the problem. How we can tackle this issue?
Yeah, I hear you, and that's a real concern. But I think you're talking about a different type of team activity. Like you're talking about the sort of team activity that's serious and graded, like a homework team or a problem team or a problem-based learning team. I'm talking about the sort of 30-second to 2-minute activity that you do during a class, which is typically not graded, right?
Okay, no problem with that. In this case, no comment.
Right. For the more significant one, that is, we could talk about if you want to talk offline or later. There are a bunch of things that we can do to increase individual accountability in team settings, and there's a whole literature on that. So I'm happy to talk about that, but that's not quite what I was trying to talk about here.
Okay. No. Next week I'm gonna meet with you. Next week I'm gonna meet with you.
That sounds good.
There was a discussion. If somebody is already working fine on his activity or a team seems to be engaged.
Yep.
Room for facilitation, or it will be like interruption.
Yeah, I would say, so my parenting rule is not trying to make a happy child happier. I think if you have a team which is functioning well, you should leave them alone. If you have an activity which is going well, you don't need to insert yourself in to facilitate to make it go well. It's already going well. Was that your question, Man, or did I? Yeah, but here what we're talking about are the sorts of things that you can do. So again, like walking into the room or circulating around breakout rooms. Like when I bop into a breakout room and you're having a good conversation, I just leave. All right. If it's dead silent and no one's talking, that's when I say something. Okay. So I think it's the same thing in a face-to-face classroom. You walk around, and if things are going well, as you're eavesdropping on the conversations, if they're on topic, you just walk by. If they're off topic or they seem stuck, you stop and facilitate. Okay, good. All right. Like I said, no rocket science here, nothing particularly complicated. But
so facilitation is more like a reaction rather than an initiative.
I mean, some of it is an action. Like walking around the room is an action. Some of it is a policy, right? Like if you have a bonus policy for participation, or your policy is that students report out at the end of every activity and you're going to call on students randomly, that's kind of a policy as much as an action, but some combination of those two things. Some of the stuff
Sometimes,
some of what people write about is just body language and facial expression. That is, do you communicate that you actually want and expect your students to participate? Or do you communicate somehow that you really, you don't really expect them to engage, and you're not going to engage either? I'm sorry, I think I talked over somebody who wanted to say something. Okay, maybe not.
That was Dr. Zuhair, I think.
yeah, I was going to say that sometimes it works if you come to a group and says, I heard good thing from the other groups. So just to motivate everybody that somebody's doing well.
Yeah. Okay, good. Like I said, the takeaway here is lots of things you can do, do some of them. Okay, I have a video clip that I want you to watch because sometimes I think it's one, I'm tired of talking, and two, I think it's sometimes nice to see a live classroom to see what's going on. So I'm going to show you a 2-minute video clip where the instructor is Rich Felder, who happens to be a friend of mine and a colleague, the person who actually introduced me to active learning. But I want you to identify several things. I want you to look at the students and tell me how you think they're responding. I want you to look at the any facilitation strategies that you see, all right? I want you to look at any explanation strategies that you see. And I want you to critique the video. That is, tell me the things about the way this person is doing active learning that you like, and tell me the things that you don't like, okay? So again, I'm gonna show a 2-minute video clip. And the thing that I want you to note during those clips, there are several. I want you to note how the students are responding. I want you to notice any facilitation strategies that you see. I want you to note any explanation strategies that you see. And I want you to critique it. Tell me the things that you like and tell me the things that you don't like, okay? All right, here's the clip. Let's see if I can get it to work.
What you'll see now, I get them into groups, assign recorders, and give them something to read and discuss. If you're in groups of 3, the one in the middle is going to be recorded for the series of exercises. And if there's 4 of you in the group, so there's 2 of you in the middle, flip a coin or just decide on which one of you is going to be recorded, and that one prepare to write. I'm just going to want one person writing in the series of exercises that you're going to have 3 or 4 people talking. Okay, do that for me now. Just decide who's going to be recorded. Recorders, get ready. Okay, I want you to take something like 1 minute and lean over, because you only have one of these things to read in your group. Glance over quickly the first page. It's stuff you've all seen before, but I want to make sure that we're on the same page, as it were. Quickly go through it, and if any of you have any questions about what's on that page, talk among yourselves to make sure you've got it. Quick read on this, just to convince yourself that you've seen it all before. Go. Notice that most of them get right into it, and one of them spots a mistake in the notes, which he calls to him.
For the delta U and delta H, that'd be out minus in.
I'm sorry?
The delta U and the delta H, that'd be out minus in.
Let's see, where are you?
Right.
Oops.
Out minus in. Yep, that's a typo. For delta U and delta H, those subscripts on the second summary should be in. While they're working, I warn them that I'm going to call on someone for a response to an embedded question in the notes. And after a while, I stop them and call on a student. And I repeat her answer to make sure that the whole class gets it. units on a closed system energy balance equation. What does each one have? Okay, joules or kilojoules, open system balance equation. What do you think? Okay, joules per second or kilojoules per second. Joules per second is the same thing as watts, all right? Kilojoules per second, kilowatts. Okay, so.
All right. Everyone saw the clip?
Yep.
Okay, so let's go through. What I want you to do is we'll talk about, so good, this is part of a project Rich was doing. He was looking at active learning and he was bringing some people in to look at how it was going in his class. It's a snippet. I'm not going to pretend that this is every class, but here's an example of a class. How would you characterize the student response? What did you see the students doing? Anyone, either in the chat window or just speak out loud. In terms of the activities, what were the students doing?
Actually, they engaging.
Engaged, yeah.
Yeah, I thought this was a remarkably engaged group of students. That is, people seem to be talking, they seem to be intent, they seem to be doing the activity. Okay. So again, Rich has been doing this for a long time. I think he's particularly good at it. And he uses active learning in his classes quite a bit. So his students are probably used to it. But the sort of response that you saw there is more or less the student response that I see in my classes when I use active learning, which is by and large, the students actually get in their groups and they just do whatever it is I want them to do. Okay. What did you see for explanation strategies, if any? What explanation strategies did you notice?
Using a worksheet?
Yeah, there was a worksheet, which again, someone mentioned here, and you can tell I'm a fan of worksheets too, which is sometimes it's nice to have things in writing in terms of direction. So he had things explained on a worksheet. What else did he do? At the very beginning, what was he doing? Do you remember? Okay, he was giving very clear directions for, he broke people up into roles where one person was the recorder, and he was given directions for how to decide who the recorder was. And he spent some time explaining how much time he was going to give for the activity and what it was he wanted students to do.
Actually, his speech was not clear to us. I mean, maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that the sound quality didn't come through. Did anyone notice any facilitation strategies? And again, apologies for any poor quality on the sound.
I think he used very nice way of having a typo in the worksheet and starting some discussion and also raising some questions about the unit.
Yeah. Okay. Any other facilitation strategies that you noticed?
He walked around and checked the students.
Right. So again, the one that we talked about, that is, he just walked into, even in a fairly large lecture hall, he walked in and circulated around the room. All right. So again, I mean, I think that does a couple of things in terms of facilitation. One, it sends the message of I'm participating in this activity and I want you to participate as well. All right, which is different than just sitting at the front where the message you're sending is I'm being passive, so maybe it's okay for you to be passive. I mean, the other thing that happens with walking into the room is, as the instructor, you're a little scary. So walking around the room, students are more likely to engage and participate if you're going to walk by. Okay, so he did that. Anything else that you noticed in terms of facilitation? Okay. Is there anything that you saw in terms of the approach that you didn't like? Right. So again, this is an example, not necessarily an exemplar, and Rich is different than you and me. Is there anything that happened in the example that you thought might not be a good idea?
And I wouldn't say good or bad, but I would say if somebody has a question, activity, in order not to interrupt and disturb everybody, I would personally go to him and just have a private thing. And if I find the question is really useful to everybody, maybe then I will stand in front of everybody and explain it. But to start with, I wouldn't allow people just to start asking me from a distance and answer them, because that may disturb others.
Sure. Yeah, good point. Okay. Anything? Kobina has a question up. Yeah.
What I observe has nothing to do with the instructor, but the physical environment within which the active learning was taking place.
Yeah.
The auditorium slanted nature sort of didn't facilitate greater interaction, because they're sitting like a sports stadium. The typical active engagement, you want students to be able to turn their chairs around. And I think that is not a problem for the instructor, but you need a physical environment that facilitates some level of engagement, which is absent.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I would take your point and modify it a little bit, but you're right. That is, that classroom is not very well set up for doing active learning. It's a fixed seat auditorium style classroom. I mean, the only thing I would point out is, even in that environment, I think we all agreed that the level of student engagement and participation was fairly high. That is, you can't turn around and turn to the neighbor behind you. You can kind of form groups of 3 or 4 and lean into the middle. And that's what Rich had them do. But you're exactly right. You could get even better participation and not have to fight your classroom as much if you had a better classroom setup.
Yeah, so I was using that to emphasize the point about the fact that moving from the traditional stage on stage approach to teaching to the modern or the new method requires some kind of redesign of lecture rooms as well.
Yeah, again, what I would say is a redesigned classroom facilitates and enhances the use of active learning. You can use active learning in any environment, including that fixed seat auditorium, but in that environment, you're more limited. That is, you're more restricted. What the research shows is, if you put instructors into a room which is better set up for active learning, you find more active learning. Like when you have to fight the classroom, it doesn't mean you can't do it. But some of us get tired of fighting the classroom and give up. So you're right. That is, that classroom is one you have to fight a little bit. Okay, good. Any other comments that people want to make, either things that you liked or didn't like? All right. If not, let's go through one more strategy. And this strategy is not from my research. This strategy is part of our project was to conduct a literature review on what researchers and instructors think would reduce the resistance to active learning. And this was not one of the variables that we studied, but it is something that faculty has control over. So this third category of stuff is planning strategies. So I don't have data on this one, but I think there's a common sense argument to be made and a strong literature to support that you can plan to make your activities produce less student resistance. So things like designing the activity to fit very well into your lesson plan. That is, not introducing activity for the sake of activity, but planning the activities to connect very closely to your instructional objectives and what it is students should be learning. The other type of thing that you can do to plan is you can plan activities which encourage everyone to participate. So for example, having a poll is something everyone can participate in. When you ask, does anybody have a question? You typically get 1 or 2 people to respond. All right. So there are things that you can do to plan the activity where certain types of activities by their nature tend to engage more people, or things that you can do to encourage more people to participate. You might periodically collect feedback from your students, either in a 1-minute paper or something more formal, and to ask them, what about the activities is going well? What about the activities is not going well? What could I do as the instructors to make the activities more effective and to get people to participate, more effectively? Just periodically, you might get feedback of that sort. Another type of planning activity is a reflection. That is, you might periodically reflect and make notes on what's working and what didn't work. So I don't do this, all that frequently, but at the end of every course, for example, I make notes to myself for the next time I offer the course. And I think about what worked and what didn't work and some changes I want to make. And that type of activity might be something that you do to make your active learning more effective and to generate more student resistance. Okay. I have a list of planning activities that I've gathered from the literature that people suggest. One last time, I want to put you into a breakout room. The link is on the slide, where I want you to look at my suggested planning activities. And again, either pick the ones that you think would work for you, or to generate some better ones that you think would be better. Okay. Let me take, I notice there's a comment in the chat. Let's take a look. Yep, the link for the worksheet is there. All right, any questions before I have you go into breakout rooms one more time and to think about ways you can use planning to make your active learning better? Okay, if not, I'll have Solomon put you into the breakout rooms.
Okay, I'm opening all breakout rooms.
Thank you. Salman, would you bring them back from their breakout rooms?
Okay, I will.
Are you seeing my slide again?
Yes, I can see your slides. Do we have one more breakout rooms?
We might. But personally, I think after 2 hours, people are going to be tired. So I'm not sure I'm going to do it one more time or not. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Did anyone come up with a planning activity that you liked that was not on the list of suggestions? No is a perfectly fine answer. I'm just personally curious.
Yes, if you allow me.
Absolutely.
Yes, there is a simple technique that I think more and more of our colleagues are start using to get everybody involved, literally everybody. You know, you allow them, and there are many ways of doing this now, to submit short answers. Not on the chat, because you know that defeats the purpose, because this is open for everybody and you cannot really follow up. But you know, provide some private link on Teams or Zoom or whatever. This is always available. So that, for example, let's say you have a question with a very short answer, few words. So okay, ask them, okay, please submit your answers to that link. Now, the nice thing about this procedure or this technique is, first of all, as an instructor, you can look at all the answers and you can pick the interesting one to discuss. Because everybody participated. The other thing is, you even can use this as, you know, as an assessment for the classwork, you know, those who really participate. So this, you know, I think this was found useful.
Okay, good. Yeah, so again, planning your course activities to explicitly collect short answers from every student in class, and then planning to skim those rapidly and respond to the ones that you think are interesting, that are worth discussion. So good. It's a way of making the class a little bit more engaging and dynamic, and a way of planning to get everybody to participate.
And the assessment, Mike, is very important, because that helped us a lot for assessment later on.
Yeah, assessment is about, figuring out what your students are thinking and what they know. So it gives you a lot of feedback on what they're thinking and what they think they know. Great.
But don't you think it would be more, I don't think it would be more benefit if you don't ask them to put their names?
No, why?
More engagement?
Well, it depends.
Without assessment, that's what I meant, yeah.
Well, it's, you know, as I said, you hit many birds with one stone. Why wouldn't I use it also for assessment? When you do this exercise 20 times in the course or 30 times in the course, you have a lot of data that you can judge that the student was participating, was serious, not necessarily correct answers, but at least he was taking it seriously.
But I think active learning is the purpose. The main purpose should be engaging the students and deepen the learning process, not assessment.
But we all agreed that, you know, when you put some grades and marks, more engaging. We agree on this.
Yeah, so I think there are reasons to both do it anonymously, and there are reasons to do some grading, and there's no particular reason why you can't do some combination of the two, right? That is, you can, and in fact, I think some reasonable advice for you as an instructor in a class is to try it both ways and to see kind of what gets you the response that you like. If you find that posting things anonymously, you still get all the responses that you want, and the engagement is high, and people are being more candid, and that's working for you, then keep it up. If you try to get them to post things anonymously and you get a very anemic response where almost nobody is putting anything in, you might put in place some policy where their participation counts in some small way towards their grade. We're not talking about 50% of their grade or 20% of their grade, but 2% of their grade or 5% of their grade might be participation, and that might be one of the factors, right? That is, we don't have to be rigid about it. We can be flexible and try it, try it a couple different things and see what works. And I think what you might find is that some years one strategy works and the next year a different strategy works better. It kind of depends on the topic and the class and how you happen to be feeling that day. All right, great. You guys you've been very good. It's been about 2 hours. Let me wrap up. All right, so I would say if there's a takeaway from the session tonight, and I want to kind of wrap it up and take it away, which is, one, Faculty's concern about student resistance has been shown to be a barrier to the adoption of active learning. That's one of the things that stops us from using active learning as much as I think we should, is that we have concerns about how students are going to participate or not, how they're going to feel or not, and how they're going to evaluate our teaching. I'd say the best research that we have so far should be comforting in terms of what it says about student resistance. By and large, student responses to active learning are positive. By and large, they find the activities valuable, they like the activities, and they participate fully. That being said, a small number of them don't, and that is a concern because even a small number can have an inhibiting effect on faculty because those are the students we sometimes focus on. The other second, I think, comforting piece of message that I wanted to get across tonight was there are some common sense things that faculty can do that research has shown that actually takes an already fairly positive student response and makes it even more positive. So the ones that I have data on are explanation and facilitation strategies. And while and both of these things are fairly straightforward. The more you explain why you're using active learning, and the more clearly you explain what it is you want students to do, the more they buy into it and the more they participate. Secondly, the more you do to facilitate and grease the wheels for the activity, the more, in fact, the better the activities go. And again, this combinations of things can be quite significant. So I share with you some data that showed that faculty who did a lot of explanation and facilitation had remarkably higher course evaluations than people who did very little. Finally, the last message from the workshop is, I don't have data on this, so this message is a little bit less strong. A lot of people suggest that there are things that you can do that involve planning that would make the activities go better and reduce student resistance. And so the main message I want to get across is faculty should worry about student resistance a little bit less. We should use that as less of a barrier for active learning because those levels are in fact small. And there are things that we can do that take that small resistance and make it even smaller, okay? And with that, I will thank you for your participation and wrap up. I will linger for a couple of minutes in case anyone has a question they want to talk about. But other than that, I want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Mike, one question.
Yep.
Okay, can you tell me, what your percentage of your class student evaluate you? For example, if you have 30 students, all of them go and evaluate you, or look like, say, 80%, 70% or something?
It depends.
Just roughly, I'm not asking for specific.
I'd say in general, almost all of them complete the course evaluations. The last year has been unusual with COVID. The classes have been online and the feedback has been less. But in general, 80 to 90% of my students complete their evaluation forms.
Okay, the question about faculty concern here, actually, because of the student, sometimes 9 students from 30 evaluate you, just 2-3 students bad, they put your evaluation to the earth. And unfortunately, the administration take it seriously on from 9 students. And this is what's become the problem for faculty.
Yeah, I agree. That is, faculty committees should be encouraging the administration to treat student evaluations reasonably, all right? And so, one reasonable thing is you shouldn't be making serious faculty, decisions based on a small number or a small percentage of student responses. Like you should, that's bad data science. I don't think you should ignore student evaluations. I think the silliness is on both ends. I think it's silly to overemphasize student evaluations. These people are smaller, they're younger, there are things that they're not in a position to evaluate. At the same time, it's silly to ignore student feedback. These are the people who are in the class. This is the persons for whom the class is designed. You should ask those students for feedback. All right, you just need to be mature and reasonable when you look at their feedback in terms of what you do with it. That is, student evaluation should be one component, but not the most important component of a teaching evaluation program.
Excuse me, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really very nice presentation and very good ideas about reducing resistance. If you just allow me, looking now at the resistance to apply active learning, and considering the two factors, one is resistance of students, and two is lack of confidence and training of faculty. You'll give more weight.
Maybe the second one, but that's just a guess. So if that is, I think faculty do what faculty want to do. I think faculty do what faculty are comfortable doing, right? So I think, you know, a lot of my work in workshops like this is to try to get faculty to want to use active learning and to feel comfortable in using active learning. And if you want to do it and if you're comfortable, you're going to do it.
Thank you.
What do you think, man? There is a lack of training for our faculty?
I think lack of motivation, because everybody can be trained. Lack of passion about the thing. If you have the passion, you can get trained. There is no reason why you cannot get trained.
How do we?
I don't. This is a big question. How to create passions?
How to create passion?
I'll tell you what, yeah, Dr. Sayed, I can comment on that.
Okay.
Okay, I can comment on that. When the university distinguish based on, you know, for example, promotion for faculty.
That's not passion, Mahmoud. That's not passion. That's
no, not passion, not passion. No, I'm not passion. Just a minute. Because the effort from the faculty when worry about their promotion and their, you know, look like something, they're looking on publication. A lot of them sometimes might not want to spend the time and something for that. Because this time consuming, yeah. I'm doing this one BBL. It takes look like 3 times what I used to do before. Especially online, make it much harder.
That's not the definition of passion, yeah, Mahmoud. Passion, when you're passionate about something, it regardless of the obstacles. You're passionate about it.
I know, but you know, this is time consuming and it takes
Right.
you know, a lot of time. Some faculty, they sometimes, you know, they want to be quicker a little bit. That's might take time because this takes time really. I mean, honestly, put it in this perspective.
But you know, so Mohammed makes a good point about that. I mean, it's true, it's not passion, but even the most passionate person can be worn down if they feel like they're fighting against the current year after year after year. So you do want an alignment between the university policies and reward structure and the things that they say are important. You know, people who are passionate shouldn't have their passion beaten out of them by the environment in which they work.
But honestly, Mike, I'm talking about my university, and I'm thinking this is a situation everywhere else. When people find your passion works and if you added a value, they will start looking at it differently.
I agree. I mean, I think one of the joys of faculty life, and I think being a professor is the best job on the planet, but one of the joys of faculty life is the ability to indulge your passions. That is, there are very few jobs where you get to come in and do the things that you're excited about. I teach the courses that I want to teach in the ways that I want to teach them. I do the research that I want to do and you know, my university was, you know, 20 years ago when I started doing educational research, my university wasn't supportive at all. They thought it was a terrible idea and told me so. But that's where the passion comes in. That's, I didn't care that they told me so. You know, I did it anyway. But now, you know, now that I don't need their support, now they're very happy to support me. Yeah, that's the way universities work. As once you don't need the credit anymore, they're happy to give you the credit.
Mike, I told my son that, you know, being a faculty member is the best job in the earth. Then he had a quick comment. He told me, "What do you do? Half of your age you have been tested, and then you spend the other half testing other people. It is the best job." So I did.
Yeah, well, so we're getting off topic. That is, you know, some of Mahmoud's questions and Mon's question. I mean, some of it comes down to hiring. Some of it, like in terms, if you want the faculty to be passionate about the, you know, certain things, it helps to hire the right people who have that passion and express that.
Yes.
Passion can change, but it's easier to hire the right people than it is to change the people that you've hired.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much. All right, go enjoy the rest of your evening.
You.
I will walk into various communities of practice from
We're
here.
going to sleep. We're going to sleep. We're already late. It's already 10 now.
It's already 10 o'clock.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
You're very, very
nice talk.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. It was great. And thank you, Salman.
Welcome, Doctor.
Okay.
I will close this meeting now.
Okay, yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody. I will send the evaluation. Please fill it.
All right. Yes, they will do.